This is a second video for Unit 3 of the TESOL course at Southern Utah University. Take a look at some other methods, including community language teaching, silent way, suggestopedia, total physical response, and then we'll look at developing an eclectic approach. So let's look at some of these different methods. The first one we'll take a look at is community language teaching, and this classroom involves students sitting facing towards each other in a circle with the teacher walking around the outside. When students want to communicate with each other, they draw the teacher's attention, they speak to the teacher in their native language, who translates what the student has said into the target language, and then the student repeats that translation to the whole group. And this goes back and forth with students wanting to say something, asking the teacher to translate, and the student repeating the translation back to the group. The focus here is on students inferring what the language is based on these translations. So what's nice here is it really gets the students thinking about the language and how it works and how the target language matches the translation from the native language. And it's focused on getting learners to interact and communicate with each other. The problem is it's very difficult to implement, especially if learners all speak different native languages. The chances that the teacher would be able to understand and translate those messages is pretty low. The other thing is it can be very frustrating for learners having to be so dependent on the teacher for so long. And there's not often a lot of explicit instruction, so learners really have to be good at figuring out how language works by listening to samples. A related approach is the silent way. Now this related in the sense that it requires learners to do some discovery and deep thinking about language and how it works. But the focus here is on pronunciation. And this is a teacher-led classroom, but the teacher doesn't speak. Instead, the teacher uses color charts similar to the one that we see here in the diagram. Now that color chart corresponds to a sound chart that the teacher uses to know how to tell learners to produce the sounds of the target language. So the chart there below represents English sounds, and so then these colors would be presented to learners, and the teacher would point to different colors to indicate what sounds the learner should make in order to produce the words in the target language. The problem is this is very frustrating and very difficult. How does a learner know what the dark pink sound is? They just have to start guessing until they figure it out, and the teacher gives them visual feedback that yes, that's the right sound. So it can take a long time, hence the silent way, because there's a lot of discovery and frustration as learners try to figure this out. But the idea is that it's going to help them have really good pronunciation, and they'll be deep thinkers about how language works. Suggestopedia is focused on the idea that all language learners have what's called an affective filter. The affective filter is a barrier that may keep us from being open to new experiences and to learning new things. And so the idea of a teacher in the Suggestopedia tries to create a classroom atmosphere of trust and relaxation so that learners will be open to accepting this language and viewing themselves as learners and speakers of this language. So it often involves using music and relaxing chairs and just a nice classroom environment to encourage risk-taking and openness. One of the concerns with this method is that it focuses heavily on memorization. So once the learners are relaxed, we get them reading through dialogues or other kinds of experiences where there's not a lot of explicit explanation of the language, but certainly the idea of getting learners feeling open to learning the language and reducing those kind of emotional barriers is very useful. Total physical response is another method that involves a lot of body movements, and the goal is to match up a body movement with a new vocabulary word. Every time a new vocabulary word is introduced, a new symbol, sign, or movement needs to be associated with it. So it can be very interactive and fun, especially with younger learners. Older learners may have an effective filter that prevents them from enjoying this method quite as much, but if it's done right, even adult learners can appreciate this method. Its main limitation is because vocabulary has to be tied to actions, it's easier to do with very concrete nouns and verbs, like walk. We could do an action that shows walk and tie it to that word. But some other more abstract language, like idea, it's harder to represent maybe with an action. And so this is great for beginners. It doesn't work so well with more advanced learners. So all of these different approaches have some advantages and disadvantages, and they can work in some contexts. The idea is that language teachers today are in what we would consider a post-methods era, where we don't just rely with one particular method or approach. Instead, we take a more eclectic approach. Eclectic means drawing from a variety of different sources, and we use different ideas from different methods that fit our learners. Our classroom should be learner-centered, which means we think about our students' backgrounds, their needs, their goals, and we select parts of different methods that will best accomplish what our learners need and for the situation where we're teaching the language. So in this video, we've taken a look at some other different language teaching methods, but ultimately what we're proposing is that an eclectic approach is needed. Draw the best items from different approaches and bring them together in a classroom approach that works for you and your students.